All right, y'all. We are back with another episode of the Brothers-in-Law podcast. I am one of your humble hosts, Imani, your brother-in-law.
Conrad, I'm here.
I got my boy here, my other brother-in-law, and we got a special guest here, my man Bruce. Want to get to your story and get to your introduction in just a second. But for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time here at the Brothers-in-Law podcast, it's funny, I feel like the intro should change because when we first started the podcast, we said this is a know your rights platform.
Yeah.
And what we do here is to explain your rights and your powers, but it's navigated and it's grown from that.
Yeah.
And here we just discuss all things life, but related to law in some kind of way. So yeah, we hope that anybody who engaged with the podcast with this episode can just gain more insight into the realities of our experiences and how that intersects with the law itself. But without further ado, I want to let my brother also introduce himself. We got my man Bruce Bryan here.
Yes.
Bruce, thank you for being here. Can you just tell the people, who you are? You don't have to go deep into your story just yet, but...
Thank you so much. My name is Bruce Bryan. It's really an honor to be here with my brothers and to share with our audience, what life has been like for someone wrongfully convicted.
Right.
And it's interesting you talked about know your rights.
Right.
Being something that you delve into as well, because we have a group at my firm called 456.
Okay.
That primarily focuses on the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. Because we believe that those are the three things that contribute to wrongful convictions or just, false arrests.
Right.
Or being falsely accused.
Yeah.
So maybe one day I'll introduce you to them as well.
We love that.
We'd love
Yes.
it, yeah.
Got you. Well, I know we met in July at a training called NCDC. It's a training that I would encourage any litigator to go, no matter what level you are in your attorney years. I went there. It's a 2-week intensive training program. They give you a mock problem, and you work the problem all the way from jury selection to closing, and you get to learn from experienced attorneys all across the United States. Bruce, you were there. You were speaking. You were sharing your story about you're being wrongfully convicted, and it was powerful to me because I don't think attorneys enough, hear from the perspective of people that are in their client's shoes. And I feel like those stories and those testimonies really change our practice more than learning from attorneys. Like, we need to hear how our clients feel. We need to hear what their perspectives are. We need to hear what they need. And I think that will make us better lawyers.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree with that. I think, our practice should be client-centered, meaning like the client should be the center of everything we do.
Right.
And they should really drive what the litigation is. And our job is to really use the skill set that we have to make that vision come to fruition. So
Right.
I agree that client should be the centerpiece of everything we do.
Right.
But also I think it's important for attorneys to know that they in some way, by being lackadaisical in their duties, by not being diligent, and not listening to their client and paying a close attention to detail,
Right.
can actually contribute to wrongful convictions. Right? They can contribute to the ineffective assistance of counsel,
Which
is a common, post-conviction motion,
Right.
440.10 motion
Right.
that we always see
Right.
in courts,
Yeah.
because clients feel like they were not deprived, they were deprived of adequate representation.
Right.
So I think by being your best and being informed and taking a client-centered approach, you are more aware of all the dynamics of what contributes, whether it's prosecutorial misconduct, misidentification, or it's just bad lawyering,
Right.
Yeah.
can play a role in a wrongful conviction.
And in your case, it was all three.
And in the case, it was all three.
All right. So I want to let's get to it. All right. So by now, people know you were wrongfully convicted. How many years you served?
I served 29 years in New York State prison.
29 years. Wrongfully convicted of murder.
Wrongfully convicted of murder.
Okay. Can you tell us the facts of the case? And then tell us how you came to be wrongfully convicted.
Before we get there, though, people may not know what a wrongful conviction is. So,
Break it down.
So just to explain what a wrongful conviction is, somebody gets convicted of a crime, meaning they're found guilty in some way, either by pleading or the jury convicting them. And when we say it's wrongful, we say it's wrongful because there was something in the process that went wrong, or the person is actually innocent of what they're being charged of, or what they were being charged of. And so that's what a wrongful conviction is. Somebody that's convicted of a crime and they shouldn't have been.
Right.
So.
And oftentimes, to add to that, there are countless people who plead guilty and are actually, wrongfully accused.
Yeah.
Right.
And they wind up being wrongfully convicted because they plead guilty.
Right.
Because of the horror that they go through on Rikers Island.
Right.
Yeah.
And their desire to leave Rikers Island and go upstate, or to just get the case over with.
Right.
People will plead out.
Right.
That's why we encourage people to sign on to the Challenging Wrongful Conviction Act bill, which is pending now, which will create a pathway by which people who actually pled guilty can pursue their wrongful conviction. They can pursue their exoneration.
Right. That's an important thing to point out. I think when people think about wrongful convictions, they think that the person who went to trial and was found guilty, they don't think that somebody can plead guilty but still be innocent.
Right.
So I think that's a powerful thing to point out, because people plead guilty for all kinds of reasons. Like you said, get the case over with. They're scared of going upstate. Other things that they're worried about. Right. They don't want to lose their kid, don't lose their job. So, I'm just going to plead guilty. That happens more often than not, and people don't know.
Nothing to do with actual guilt or innocence.
That's why the whole pursuit of closed Rikers is so important, because Rikers Island is a horror house.
Right.
People commit suicide. People die there over and over again. We read about it. We hear about it in the newspaper.
Right.
And so, you have a lot of people who, as a result of the pain and the anguish and the hardships that they're going through on Rikers Island, they would actually plead guilty for a crime that they haven't committed. Right. The same way you have countless people who make statements in the precinct, who are manipulated into making statements in the precincts against their best interests.
Right.
Right. Because of, the harm that they've endured as a result of rogue police officers.
Yep.
The same thing happens on Rikers Island. It's a horror house. I spent several years there. I know how violent it is. I know how dangerous it is for young people to be laying up there for years and years and years, and going to court, waking up at 4:30 in the morning to go to court, just to not see a judge and be returned back to Rikers Island, eating sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, and receiving what we all know as bullpen therapy. Spending 7-8 hours laying on a steel bench. So closed Rikers is important. Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act is an important bill that we need to get behind. And for those of us who don't know, New York State is number 3 in wrongful convictions.
Yes.
With that said, I'll get into a little bit and just gloss over my story a bit. I don't want to get into too many of the details.
Tell us as much as you can.
Yeah.
But, I was arrested in 1994 for a crime that happened in 1993, where a young person lost their life. I was arrested, laid on Rikers Island for 30 months, tried by a rogue prosecutor, former Queens prosecutor, John Scarpa, and I was convicted and sentenced to 37 and a half to life, which in New York State, 37 and a half to life means you do 37 and a half years before you see a parole board. Unlike some states that have what they call good time, where half your sentence, you may get 25 years, but you do 12. In many of the southern states, it's that way. In New York State, it's not.
And how old were you when you got convicted?
I was 23.
Wow.
I was released last year on executive clemency by Governor Kathy Hochul, which I'm continuously grateful for. And I continue to keep shine a spotlight on, whether it's misconduct or wrongful convictions, or it's just inequities in sentencing in the criminal justice system that we see Black and brown people from marginalized communities mostly impacted by.
Right.
So throughout the course of my years, I've got involved with study groups that were led by what we call old timers. I was fortunate, even though I was in a unfortunate and a horrible situation, I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by men who study the law, men who had a high level of consciousness. From former BLA guys, former Black Panthers, former Young Lords, and just guys who were pursuing education. And one of the things I learned early on was that where I was didn't have to define who I was.
Right.
And so I made a conscious decision to bloom where I was planted.
Right.
Wherever God allowed me to be planted, I had to make a decision that I was going to bloom.
Right.
Despite the fact that it lacked sunlight, I had to find a way to bloom. So I like to always talk about what it means to be a dandelion, right? To go from, from being raised in a concrete jungle
Right.
and finding a way to slip through the cracks and bloom and grow and thrive.
Right.
Right? Where most of our lives, while incarcerated, as well as living and, coming up in marginalized communities, we've functioned off of survival mode.
Right.
Which is, a high level of awareness, that kind of like that sixth sense of being able to detect danger. The whole PTSD thing, right? I call it post-incarceration traumatic syndrome, which I still experience today.
Right.
From going on the train to large crowds to restaurants to just being in a cave on a hike. These things still impact you.
Right.
And these are some of the things that you don't often hear politicians talk about.
Right. How many years you say you did?
29 years.
You did more years
incarcerated than I did free. I went in at 23, came home at 53.
Wow.
So, and the collateral consequences, what we call collateral, are sometimes for me it's
primary.
It's the wrong term. It's primary.
Right.
Right. But when a child loses a primary caregiver, or when a mother loses her son, as in the case of my mother and father,
right.
It impacts the entire family.
Yeah.
Both parents, siblings, loved ones, friends, in many cases, the community.
Right.
I had store owners would always ask my mother about me, give her little food items to send to me. The barber in my neighborhood would always send me things.
Right.
So it impacts a community, right? And as a whole, it impacts society because we never think about the untapped talent that lies behind prison bars.
100%.
Right. I know two of what I consider to be two of the greatest legal minds that I know of come out of prison, right? And were wrongfully convicted. Both men, both Derek Hamilton and Jabbar Collins, two wrongfully convicted men who actually work in law now, who actually work to set other men free, right? Who work, whether it's providing courses at St. John's or it's working at the Pearl Mother Center where Derek Hamilton is. These guys are doing extraordinary work because of their life experience. And no one would have thought that these two black men being wrongfully convicted, coming from marginalized communities, would thrive in a legal setting. Right. But it's more about them not having the opportunities. Right. We always hear about, the public safety, our education, and and different things like that. Coming from an inferior educational background, you never imagined that there's so much talent and so many gifted men in these marginalized communities. But it exists. Yeah. Behind bars and in here. I like to tell people the greatest artist that I've ever seen is not Pablo Picasso or Basquiat. They're behind prison bars. Right. Because of their ability to make something from nothing.
Right. And also pain really produces creativity.
And pain produces creativity. Right. Pain produces creativity, but you can also go from pain to purpose, right? And many of these artists have found purpose in their art with limited resources, because it's not but so much that you can have behind prison bars to do art. So I know guys that will take soap and create art, create statues and sculptures from soap, from pencils, from pen, from just wood they found in the yard, from rocks, and create extraordinary art that can be sold in any museum. So I think it's important to understand that when we wrongfully convict someone, we take someone out of those communities, it impacts the family, community, and sometimes society as a whole. And it deprives society, it deprives humanity of the gifts that those people have, because we all have gifts. Yeah.
So to the extent that you're comfortable, could you mind sharing a little bit more of like the facts of your case and your trial and what led to your wrongful?
The facts of my case was a drug-related shooting happened in Queens that left a young person dead.
And how did you
A
get
young
arrested?
person by the name of Travis Lee.
How did you get caught up in all
Well,
of that?
being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Being at the wrong place in the wrong time, being in the area where, people buy weed, sell weed, and just, everything is going on. In these areas, they were like what they consider to be high drug markets.
Yeah, it's the hood.
Almost like what 42nd Street was years ago in terms of for prostitution. High areas that are impacted or infested with drugs and hustlers and different things like that.
Right.
So this led me, despite being with my girlfriend and a cab driver, this led me to be falsely accused and wrongfully convicted.
So you're saying on the same night that the shooting occurred, you were with someone else?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
And then I know earlier we kind of flagged how, what I think is very interesting from your story, and because I also know you a little bit, is that your story to me highlights kind of the dichotomy of public defense. Because what I hear, you had a public defender who really let you down, and I want to hear that story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your story led you to meeting one of the best public defenders that I know, Karen Smolar, who's
Absolutely.
trained, many public defenders, and who I, really give a lot of credit to, because she gave me opportunities to learn at NCDC, and she's one of the foundations of the Bronx Defenders. And I think it's interesting how your story both has introduced you to bad public defense and brilliant public defense. So I'm curious if you can explain about, what were some of the harms that happened as a result of your lawyer, and even the prosecution. I know you shared some of this at NCDC.
I think it's an interesting fact in that people believe that because you hire a defense counsel as opposed to receiving a public defender, that you're somehow receiving better representation.
Right.
And that is the farthest thing from the truth. Public defenders take on this career because they have a commitment to righting some of the wrongs that they've seen in society, right? A person goes to law school and says, I want to do public defense because they have a commitment to not the monetary gain, but to the injustices that take place, that they witness, right? They have a commitment to trying to create a fair and equitable system. So public defenders can very well are some of the best defense counsels you're going to find. They do some of the most work in terms of directly impacting the system and trying to reform and change policies. Much of that is done by public defenders. So public defenders are awesome. I just happen to have a public defender who was impacted by trauma. He suffered his own trauma. And as I believe that as a result of that caused him to shy away from his role as a public defender.
Right.
And, along with him being slashed by his previous client across the face in the court pens, because his previous client couldn't get rid of him, because he had asked the court several times, can you relieve me of this counsel? He's not representing me properly. This has led to him being slashed in the bullpens,
which now affects
in the Queens Court pens, which now affect his entire life, right? Not just how he represented me, but his whole life, right? Because he began to see a psychiatrist, which we found out 20 years later that he was seeing a psychiatrist, and actually was unable to properly defend a client because he didn't trust him, he wouldn't communicate with him, and he had a fear, right? He suffered from PTSD himself. And to have me be his next client and have to represent someone else charged with murder, it created a fear, right? It created a barrier where he refused to communicate, refused to come and sit down with me and go over the facts. He might be the only defense counsel I know that actually didn't have an investigator in a homicide case.
Wow.
I largely depended on my co-defendant, Clarence Smith's private attorney, Alan Brenner, and his investigator for any type of direction or any type of, empathy. I depended on him, right? For any care or concern with regards to my life. I received none of that from my defense counsel, Reginald Tao. Absolutely none of it.
Wow.
And that's just to show you that, but that bad lawyering can come from the private sector as well.
Yeah.
It's not limited to public defenders,
Right.
right? Because I work in a public defense firm now at Queens Defenders. And some of the most passionate freedom fighters are in public defense, just as we know many from the Bronx Defenders, right?
Right.
Like Karen Smolar,
Right.
who's a fighter and who will go to any lengths to fight for her client. The founder of Queens Defenders, Lori Zeno, a fighter and tries to hire and provide the best to defense counsels so that they can get out there and do the job,
Right.
right? And do it well, right? And she tries to ensure that they do it well. But a lot of these young people are passionate. They have a desire to change the world, like yourselves, because of what they've seen past generations experience.
Right.
So public defense it's a blessing, right? It's a blessing. And like I said, some of they can do. There's nothing a private defense counsel can do that a public defender can't do.
Right.
Right? There's absolutely nothing that they can't do. So the quality of representation that you receive is not determined by whether or not you have private counsel or a public defense counsel. It solely depends on the counsel, right? And how concerned they are and how adamant they are about defending their client and how much they love what they do. Because you got to love what you do to be a public defender.
Right.
Right? Because you're not doing it for monetary reasons.
Right.
You have to love what you do.
Right.
You have to love justice. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about what does the Lord require of me. It's in Malachi, I believe. And he talks about to do justice. Right? And I think public defenders, what they are passionate about doing is justice and to pursue righteousness and to pursue fairness. So I'm always humbled by the work that I see my colleagues do at Queens Defenders, as well as Bronx Defenders and Karen Smolar, who's a dear friend of mine.
Right.
And the countless people that I've met through her. Like my friend Steve Zeidman, whose son is
At the Bronx.
at the Bronx Defenders.
Right.
Brilliant
lawyer.
Zeidman is
Phenomenal.
brilliant. His son is brilliant.
Right.
Not only are they brilliant, they have a passion for what they do.
Right.
They have a love for what they do. And they have a passion to do justice and to see a world where things are much more fair and equitable for those who are deprived or those who are marginalized, those who are systemically oppressed, and those who have been essentially cast out of mainstream society.
Right.
Right? They have a desire to do right by those people. So, Daniel Zeidman and Steve Zeidman, these are guys that you have to love, that you have to respect, that are some of the best. Steve Zeidman is the best clemency lawyer probably in the country. Not probably. He is the best executive clemency lawyer in the country and has gotten more people out than any attorney involved in executive clemency. Maybe has gotten out in the last 5 years just as many people as the Innocence Project has gotten out.
Wow.
So whether it's been through executive clemency, through parole, or through compassionate release, Steve Zeidman is a warrior for justice and someone that I love dearly, right?
Wow.
And I'm sure his son Daniel, who has those same genes and those same passions, who you all work with, is doing extraordinary work over
Absolutely.
there. Yes.
So, in your case, did you take your case to trial? Did you plead
Absolutely.
guilty?
One of the things, as I've mentioned to the parole board when I was up for parole, because when my sentence was commuted, I was required to go before a parole board.
Okay.
And one of the worst things you want to do in New York State or any state is go to a parole board and not admit guilt and not express remorse.
Right. That's what they look for.
So a lot of people were concerned about me going to the parole board after my sentence was commuted and I was granted executive clemency. But as I've said to others, I was prepared to die incarcerated before I admit to a crime that I did not commit.
Right.
So, I spoke clearly and concisely to the parole commissioners,
Right.
whom I remember today very clearly. Speaking about it just takes me back to that very day. that I was sitting before Commissioner Cawley and Samuels and telling them, while I honor the potential of the young person whose life was lost, I was not guilty of this crime, and I will not sit here and say that I was guilty for something that I didn't do. So, and I think that I think they understood that quite clearly. Apparently, they did, because they released me at my initial parole hearing. And you can ask, anybody that knows the system in New York State, or any state for that matter, if you don't admit guilt and express remorse, you're not making that parole board. So you can expect a 2-year. You can expect a 2-year hit.
That's very important to highlight. I feel like people don't understand the process of parole, and that could be a whole other episode. But people think that, like, when you are up for parole, you're up for parole. You can get parole. But no, you have to see a parole board. There's an actual hearing that happens. There's things they look for in order to grant parole. And as you stated, one of those main things they look for is, are you guilty? Are you remorseful? Have you expressed remorse? And if you are maintaining your innocence, then you just are further incarcerated.
Absolutely. Exactly. I know guys now that have had 25 to life, 20 to life, and have literally done 35, 33 years, because every time they went before the parole board, they said, I didn't do this.
Right.
And until they were broken,
right,
to the point where they admitted that they did something that they actually didn't do,
right,
they were released. I know guys been to the parole board 8 times. And in New York State, 8 times 2 is 16 years. Right. Each time you go to the parole board, the maximum hit is 2 years. In some states like California, you can get a hit at 5 or 10 years, I believe.
Right. And what do you mean by a hit?
You can get, the parole board can deny your release and see you in 2 years later. So you can go to parole board today and you get denied, and you won't see the parole board until 2026 again.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it's widely known in New York.
And this happens over and over and over again. That's why I like to give a lot of credit to the Parole Preparation Project.
Parole Prep.
Parole
Shout
Prep.
out Parole Prep.
Which is spearheaded by Michelle Lewin.
Her wife
Michelle
works
Lewin.
with us at the Bronx Offender.
And Michelle Lewin was actually a student of Cooney law professor Steve Zeidman, who, again, did my clemency and who I consider to be the best executive clemency lawyer in the country.
Right. We actually want to have somebody who's been through the parole prep to come in and talk about their experience.
They actually just recently had a gala, I believe.
Yes, they did.
They
did. One of our dear friends works there. We have a number of people who are, really engaged in that program. Conrad, I want you to break down a little bit, because I think when people don't understand sentencing, I know I don't want to have a whole sentencing conversation. You broke it down a little bit earlier, but I want to spend a little bit of time here real quick. I don't think people understand what it means when they hear something to life. 15 to life, 25 to life, 30 to life. I think your average person will hear that and think, oh, it could be 30, it could be life, it could be somewhere in between. I don't think they know what it means when they hear your sentence is 25 to life. Can you, or both of you, in tandem explain what it means when you get a sentence like that? It's not in between, it's not maybe 30. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, my brother Bruce explained a little bit of it already. But if you have a sentence that's, say, 25 to life, you're doing at least 25. That first 25 you're going to do. And then, like Bruce said, then you'll see the parole board. You go to the parole board. You're most likely not going to get released when you see the parole board, especially the first time. Right? You go through your parole hearing. Like Bruce said, parole board is going to deny you. You take that 2-year hit. You can try again in front of the parole board, and again and again and again. And they could deny you all the way up till the point that you have done life in jail. Right? That's what 25 to life means.
You are under supervision for life.
For life.
Whether it's in the community or it's incarcerated.
Right.
When you get 25 to life, you are going to be under criminal justice supervision for
life.
Your life.
But even on a deeper level, when you talk about sentencing, most people, and even people involved in the criminal justice system, don't realize and don't understand how a person is actually penalized for going to trial, for exercising their rights to have a trial by jury or to have a trial by judge.
Yeah, we call it a trial tax. That's what
a trial tax, right? There's a huge trial tax.
Right.
I mean, I know guys personally who were offered 6 to 12 years and have gone to trial and were convicted and sentenced to 132 and a half to life.
What?
Yes.
How?
I literally just sat down with him 2 days ago in Sing Sing. I went to court for him maybe a month ago when, again, law professor Steve Zeidman and Julia Kwan were instrumental in getting him a commutation of his sentence.
Wow.
Percy West, which is a friend of mine, so I can say his name, was offered 6 to 12 in Brooklyn for armed robbery and a shooting. No one was shot. They said he fired a shot at a cop or something, and it was a robbery that took place. He was offered 6 years as a young kid.
He got 132.
He was sentenced to 132 and a half to life.
Nobody was hit?
No one. He served 32 years. It wasn't until last year when Professor Zeidman got involved along with Julia Kwan in advocating for his resentencing. And kudos to the Brooklyn DA, Eric Gonzalez. And they resentenced him. And now to time served. So he
These are
goes
the
to
stories
parole
people
board
need to hear.
immediately.
They need to
Right.
hear
Right?
it.
I know another guy by the name of Corey Liggins who was offered 9 to 18 here in Manhattan and went to trial and was convicted and received natural life without parole. And he's still in about 27, 28 years later. So the trial tax is very serious. Sentencing is I mean, we can talk all day about the sentencing disparity here in New York State, or here in America for that matter, and what it means to go to trial and be penalized for exercising your constitutional right to go to trial, by whether it's by jury or by judge, and be sentenced exponentially higher, significantly higher.
I think it's
than
important
what your plea bargain was.
to frame it as your constitutional right to go to trial.
Exactly.
Right. It's one thing just to say I'm going to go to trial, but no, you have a right to
Right
that.
to-
You have a right to
It's
that.
in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
The fabric of
Yes.
this country. But for exercising, you're penalized tremendously in ways that affect you for the
Unbelievably. Unbelievable. I think Percy West and Corey Liggins, they're just two examples of that. But you'll find these cases across New York State. And they're two of the worst. Out of that 132 and a half to life, this man served 32 years when he was actually offered 6 years.
Wow.
It's just, there's just something so insidious about that, right? Like the simple fact that somebody says, I want to exercise my right, makes someone else go, how dare you have the audacity to use your rights? How dare you come into my courtroom and say you're going to use your right? You know what? Boom. You're going to get punished for that
Right.
Absolutely.
exponentially. That's just like,
And that primarily happens to Black and brown marginalized people.
100%.
Because you have wealthy people who go to trial and that are not, that are convicted, that are not sentenced to these
Harsh sentences.
harsh, and ridiculous sentences.
Wow. So I got a question. I know part of your wrongful conviction story also includes a prosecutor who had their own controversy and also who contributed to your wrongful conviction. Can you tell us a little bit about any controversy that surrounded the prosecutor in your case?
Well, former Queens prosecutor, John Scarpa, he's been around since the 80s. Several of his cases have been overturned as a result of his misconduct, as a result of him doing anything and everything to pursue a conviction, whether it's giving secret deals, which is what we know as a Brady violation, or just flat out misconduct, right? Whether it's Rosario or, Brady versus Maryland. For those who don't know what Brady is, it's when you withhold exculpatory evidence or you withhold secret deals that you provide to a witness on behalf of the prosecution.
Anything that's favorable to the
Anything that's favorable to the defense.
Right.
And several of his cases were overturned. In 2017, he was 17 or 18, he was charged with bribery as a defense counsel because he was essentially pushed out of prosecutor's office left Queens, went to Long Island. Something happened in Long Island. He was pushed out, and then he was forced to become a defense counsel. Now, what many people don't know is prosecutors have what they call qualified immunity. Defense counsels don't have that, despite them both being attorneys. They're both attorneys. They're both a prosecutor and a defense attorney are both lawyers, right?
Right.
One just represents the state, and one represents the people. Meanwhile, defense counselors do not have the same level of. They don't have the same level of carte blanche, so to speak, as a prosecutor would have.
Right.
They have no immunity at all.
Right.
So if you do something wrong as a defense counsel, you can be charged with a crime. Meanwhile, prosecutors engage in misconduct all across this country, and they're never charged with a crime. In fact, many of them are even allowed to resign. They're not even fired, right? Imagine if a prosecutor knew that he would face the same time that you faced if he lied or he presented false testimony, or if he withheld favorable information.
Right.
Imagine if he understood that, okay, the law says I can be in trouble. I can be fined, I can be sent to jail if I engage in this level of misconduct, right? Then things would be different. So defense counsels, John Scarpa went on to become a defense counsel. And as a defense counsel, he continued in his nefarious behavior that he engaged in as a prosecutor for 30 years. And he was subsequently arrested and charged with bribing a witness to trying to convey to him that he wanted him to change his testimony so John Scarpa's client can go free on a double homicide.
Wow.
On a double homicide. And obviously the federal government was on to him in some capacity because they have him on a wiretap. And he was convicted and sentenced to 30 months. And I'm sure that you can probably look through history and find the amount of prosecutors or former prosecutors that were arrested and convicted in New York State.
And that was a prosecutor on your case?
And that was the prosecutor in my case.
Sentenced to 30
Former
months.
Queens prosecutor John Scarpa. Yes, that was the lead prosecutor on my case from its inception to my conviction. As I speak about it now, I can literally see his face.
Do you know if after that, the state or the federal government went back to look into the cases he presided over when he was a prosecutor to see if there's any misconduct?
That would have been ideal, right? That's what you would think. They did it with Louis Scarcella, the officer from Brooklyn who engaged in misconduct. And by the way, over 20 people have been exonerated.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Right?
Like, imagine
20 of the homicide cases that Detective Louis Scarcella was involved in have been exonerated, over 20.
Yeah.
And they're looking at countless more. I mean, while Louis Scarcella has never been convicted and charged because of his own immunity as a detective, he actually still collects a pension as well.
Wow.
He still collects his pension, Louis Scarcella. However, they have taken upon, the Brooklyn DAs have taken upon themselves to begin reviewing the cases that he was involved in, right? Which is the right thing to do. That hasn't happened with former Queens prosecutor John Scarpa.
That's nuts, man.
Wow.
Just imagine the kinds of things he was doing as a prosecutor. If he was bold enough to bribe a witness as a defense attorney. Just imagine the things he was
What was he doing when he had the power of the government at his hands?
Right. In secret. To do this in secret. Right. And he's not going to get caught. That's just, that's nuts.
That's wild. Another question. I know from your story when I heard it at NCDC, there was an issue with how your name was in the system. Can you explain to us the controversy behind your name and how that also contributed to the wrongful conviction?
Yeah, they had me down as Bruce Bryant.
With a T.
Bryant. And from the precinct, from Rikers Island, from downstate, which is a reception area that you go to, I've always said, that's not my name. How can we correct this? And they said, well, that's the name we got from the courts.
And your name was Bruce Bryan.
My name is Bruce Bryan, Bryan, without a T. So, and it got to the point where for so many years, having to sign documents inside that I've gotten, I've almost gotten used to putting a T at the ending of my name. So prior to me being released, I literally practiced signing my name without the T because, we're creatures of habit.
Yeah.
So I had developed the habit of signing it with the T. I had to unlearn that and begin how to sign my proper name, B-R-Y-A-N.
Okay. Did they ever catch the person who was actually or charged?
Yes, he's convicted and serving 45 years at this time.
Wow.
Yeah.
His name wasn't Bruce Bryan, was it?
No.
Okay.
When did that happen? When did he get picked up?
The same time, he actually turned himself in.
And they still kept you in?
And they still kept us because they made it seem, what happens in Queens is this, right? When you look throughout the 80s, and this is just my analogy, right, of how things operated in boroughs across New York City during the height of the drug era, the 80s and the 90s. During those times, Queens was always known to, they had like crews, right? They would lock up crews, what we considered breakdance crews or b-boy crews back then. They considered, they had like what they call drug crews, but not individual drug dealers. So the fact that Scarpa had been involved in these type of prosecutions in his past, some of which were overturned because of his misconduct, he decided to create a scene out of a New Jack City movie and make this theory as if this was like, something out of CMB,
Right.
something with Nino Brown and, a New Jack City movie, right? Because it's about storytelling when you're prosecuting as well as when you're defending.
Right.
So if you can create, it's who can tell the best story at the end of the day and support and have something to support that story.
Right.
And I just don't want this to go over people's heads. Even though they caught the guy who did the crime for which you were charged, and the guy confessed to doing the crime for which you were charged, you were still kept in prison after that when they knew that someone else did the crime.
That's wild.
That's wild. And you were only released last year. That is wild. That is wild. I just I couldn't fathom the type of strength it takes for an individual like you to go through that and be able to still be out here using what you went through for the betterment of society. I can't commend you enough for that.
I think I appreciate that. I think it's so important to take our mess and turn it into a message that can somehow, ignite change, that can somehow help others as well. Right. So you take your pain and you turn it into your life's purpose, and you have a mission to bring about change.
Right.
Right.
That's a really good kind of segue to my next question was, it's kind of two-part. You sort of addressed this earlier, but I just want to come back to it. 29 years in prison. What would you contribute was the top things that gave you the strength to survive those 20 years in prison, to keep your mental health in order? You seem like you're a spiritual man, to keep your spirituality in order, and then to come out and not just be angry at the world. What would you say contributed to your ability to just maintain your sense?
The number one thing is my faith in God, and knowing that something good can come out of something bad, and trusting God throughout the process, and attending, Protestant services, going to church, following the teachings of Christ for years and years and years, and even today going to church and then taking time out to meditate and reflect. So I think that my number one thing was faith. My family, I would say second, my family's support, and knowing that I wanted to be there to see my family still around. Unfortunately, I lost my father in 2017.
Sorry.
But fortunately, I was able to come home and see my mother, who I actually spoke to on my drive here. So, it had to be faith, family, and my quest for freedom, right? Faith, family, freedom, and more importantly, standing on truth. Standing on truth. I think that when you have truth on your side, it gives you
Sense of peace.
a sense of peace, but it also gives you that fire to keep fighting, right? You know, and I think that, to be quite honest with you, that's a very good question. It's the first time that that I've been asked that, but I think that faith, family, freedom, and truth, if I had to put it in those 4 words, is what kept me going, allowed me to thrive as opposed to just survive. You know, so getting involved in education was important to me. Pursuing higher education. I was taught early on, they had my Brothers in Resurrection study group, they had a course called What It Means to Construct a Prison Life. So I began breaking my time up in intervals. What I wanted to do the first year upstate, the first 3 years. It took me about 2 years to get it together, right? So what I wanted to do thereon, right? So for the next 6 months or the next year or 2, what programs did I want to take advantage of? Was it alternative to violence program? Was it trying to get into group therapy where we just sit and we learn? Was it Black history, which I was, a student of, learning about, great men like Steve Bantu Biko, who is one of my favorites in history, right? Patrice Lumumba, and, just learning and educating myself about the challenges that my people have faced throughout history, right? Because Black people have stood up against insurmountable odds, and we've been forced to thrive in spite of, right? From Fannie Lou Hamer, to Kathleen Cleaver,
Right.
To Joanne Chisholm. So just studying the greats and learning about the greats and learning that, we have our collective DNA, our mothers and fathers and grandparents who have endured, slave ships, who have endured the being enslaved by Europeans in this country as well as throughout the West Indies. And what they had to endure, that DNA resides in me. And understanding and knowing that, I think, makes a difference, right? Knowing the Sankofa says you understand your past to inform your future, right? So understanding history and holding on to the history of people of African ancestry and their resilience and what they've been able to endure and to overcome. I knew that DNA exists within me. And so I had the ability to do the same. In fact, it was my duty. I had a moral obligation to do just that, to stand up against insurmountable odds and to thrive.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, we are almost at the end. I think there's 2 last things I want to ask you. The first would be, so you came home a year ago, and can you explain the work you decided to go work at a public defender's office? Can you explain what it is, the work that you do? And then maybe for the people, if you are willing to share, like what's next for Bruce Bryan in your second shot at life now?
I decided to work in the field of law, in the field of not just public defense, but human rights defense. I wanted to fight for human rights because I understood that I was just one in a million that this was happening to. And how do we prevent this from happening? Because prevention is always better than cure, right? So how do we go about preventing this from happening? Because there's so much talent, so many gifts that you see behind bars. Imagine if we honed those skills and those talents and we tapped into them before they had to face that level of adversity of being wrongfully convicted, right? And I also understood throughout my dialogue and throughout my learning that when we talk about our communities, we had to take charge and do something about it, because I understood that it was really about not having resources, not having opportunity. So whatever I could do to try to provide some level of opportunity, some level of insight, and opportunity meaning someone like myself that others can have access to. It's an opportunity for you to say, all right, give me that insight, right? Of how I should navigate the terrains of poverty, because poverty is violence, right? So how do I navigate that? how do I step out of that and try to create resources and find opportunity somewhere else? Because you learn early on that public safety is not about the absence of crime. It's more about the presence of opportunity.
It's a bar.
If we can try to provide some opportunity to our young people that are facing insurmountable odds, living in poverty, maybe they can make some better choices, right?
Right.
Because you only make choices is choices are only equivalent to options, right?
I was just about to say.
Right. So you have to know that those options exist
Right.
in order for you to make better choices.
Right.
We're quick to say, "Oh, well, these people they had a choice,
I was just about to say.
right? They had a choice to do this or to do that."
Yeah.
But what were their options?
What were the options?
Well, have you ever asked them what were their options?
Right.
Right. So that's my commitment to humanity, because we all have to commit to humanity and do something before we leave this earth. Right. It's about contributing to each other. That's more profound to me than any other legacy, is what have I got to give to humanity? Because we all are part of the human family,
Right.
right? We're all connected, no matter what we think or how we may feel. You know, I think that for the most part, we all want the same things. You know, we all want safety.
Right.
We all want health, right? We all want to make a reasonable income. We want a livable wage, not a minimum wage. We want a livable wage.
Right.
Want to be able to live in a safe and wholesome community.
Right.
And we want love, and we want compassion, and we want to be able to share, right?
Right.
That's part of what makes us human.
Right.
So that, you know, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. A lot of people say, well, how do you go back into the prisons?
Right.
Granted, that's my my third time going back into Sing Sing. I went for the graduation, I went for an event, and then I went for the Sing Sing Film Festival, which was extraordinary. And if I had to be honest, there's a level of anxiety getting on that van and going back inside that prison.
Okay.
Right.
There is definitely a feeling that comes over me, and it makes me cringe, makes me nervous. You know, my heart rate goes up, my breathing goes up, and
Right.
you know, and some people that were present can actually see it on me. So there's a level of nervousness going in, right? But you know, I mean, courage is not the absence of fear. It's about doing what needs to be done despite your fears. So in spite of my fears, I got to go in and give those brothers hope. Right? You see, I saw countless guys. I basically knew everybody in there.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, from the guy that slept in the cell next door to me. You know, some guys had tears in their eyes, and it was time to leave, as I did as well, because you develop bonds with
Right.
these guys in there. But you give them hope and let them see, man, this brother don't have on state greens, but he has a suit on, and I can go home and do and be what he's doing and being. He
Right.
can open up a door for me. So that is important to me.
I love that. All right, so as we end, we have this this phrase here that, you know, we don't give out free legal advice. It's just free game. And we ask every guest, you dropped a lot of gems already, but we ask every guest to leave some parting words, you know, a closing argument, if you say. The two of us will give some parting words, but we also wanted to give you an opportunity to, you know, we got about 5 minutes left, maybe less than that. So if there's anything, any gem, any piece of wisdom you want to leave with the audience, anyone who tunes in, what would you say that is?
I would like to give, I think I want to educate people on the word game.
To do that.
So not imparting wisdom and imparting game. What that means to me is this. I think people misinterpret game. Game has a negative connotation for most people in society. Oh, he's gaming me. Or he's running game, which means a form of manipulation.
Right.
That is the farthest thing from what game is, right? Let me just say this. Where we come from, in the inner cities, black and brown people, when we talk about game is about creative intelligence.
Knowledge.
Right? Game is about creative intelligence. What you may see one way and I see the same way, how I articulate and how I deliver it, how I address it, is going to come from a total different perspective. So it's about creative intelligence, right? And understanding that we don't have to come at a situation one way. We can use our creativity because we've always been creative people. So game is creative intelligence. And I think it's important for your audience to understand that.
I love that.
That it's not a lie. It's not about manipulation. It's about imparting some jewels so that we can uplift
Precisely.
others, right? Because it's important that we pull as we climb.
Right.
Right? It's not about you or I. This podcast is about pulling as we climb.
Right.
We're not doing this for you. We're not doing this for me. We're not doing it for yourself.
Right.
Nor the engineer. This is about pulling others up. So when people see it,
Right.
they can, they can sit back and think and reflect and maybe use their own creative minds and say, wow,
Right.
maybe I can do something differently or see something differently, right?
Right.
Because life is about changing the way we see everything,
Right.
right? Some people may say, well, that's carpets on the wall, but that carpet on the wall is there for a reason, right?
Right.
To dictate the sound that you have in this room.
Right.
It's just a creative way of creating a particular sound.
Right.
The acoustics, right? Because they matter. So game matters, creative intelligence matters. And, I would encourage each and every one of us, man, to use your creativity and do something great in life. But also, remember that incarcerated people are not separate from us. They're not separate from our communities. They're actually an extension of our community. They're an extension of our humanity, right? They're an extension of us. So whatever we can do in terms of being able to reach back to someone incarcerated, right? To write a letter to someone incarcerated, right? They got websites like writeaninmate.com, and I'm not getting paid to tell you to write an inmate, right? This is not no free endorsement, but it's something to say that you can reach out to someone behind prison bars.
Right.
In some way, shape, or form, and become involved in, movements like Closed Rikers, like Communities Not Cages, and get involved and learn more about what Queens Defenders and, and also the Bronx Defenders and what we're doing to change policy, to change the system so that we can create a better world, a better community, and a better humanity, right? So let's get involved because our brothers and sisters,
Right.
especially our sisters who are the fastest growing rate of incarcerated people,
Right.
are women. They need us. And let's advocate to our governor, Kathy Hochul, to begin letting out women on executive clemency en masse. Let's begin letting men out en masse. Let's do this every 90 days. Let's begin tapping into the best of us that are behind prison bars, right? Because each of us has the ability to say, let me write to that young lady. Let me go on Doc's website and pick a woman that's incarcerated or a man that's incarcerated and write them a note and see what they've been doing with their time.
I love that. Appreciate
Right?
that.
Because the time, they don't have to be doing time. Time can be serving them. And they deserve to be, our sisters and brothers deserve an opportunity to be free and to live free lives. So let's try to advocate to our governor and try to get some more women and men home free.
I love that. Conrad, what you got for us?
Yeah, so Brother Bruce imparted some of the game I was going to impart.
Creative intelligence.
Yeah, man. But I guess I'll leave with this. One thing that stuck with me from today's episode is that oftentimes what we call collateral consequences are actually the primary consequences for somebody who is arrested or imprisoned or jailed.
Right.
Right. And one of those primary consequences that we often neglect or don't talk about is what imprisonment does to somebody's psyche, right? What imprisonment does to somebody's mind, right? And we heard today, right, Brother Bruce talking about wanting to go back to Sing Sing and give people hope, but getting on that bus and having an anxiety reaction, right? Getting on that bus, I'm sure it brings back memories of being in there, and I'm sure it begs the question, is this real? Am I gonna leave after I come back here, or am I gonna be stuck in this place again? Right? That's what we do to people when we imprison them, right? We're not just imprisoning their body; we try to imprison their mind as well. That's what prison tries to do to people, right? And I'm glad that there's people like Bruce who are able to go back and try to show people we don't have to let prison imprison people's minds, right? But the game I want to give is that's what we do to people when we send them to prison, right? We are creating a circumstance where we force somebody to live in a mindset of anxiety, right? To live in a mindset of trauma, of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We think just sentencing somebody to prison is the end of it. That's the punishment. No, you're locking somebody's body away and you're warping their mind. Right. And so, it's just all the more important to advocate for abolition of these messed up and backward systems.
Right. There's this analogy of like, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like the question is how do you get an elephant to like not go away? And it's like you chain it up to a chain for 20 years and then you get rid of the chain. The elephant's not gonna leave. Like it doesn't know any different, it doesn't know any better. And I think that's just a small fragment of what it means to imprison somebody's mind. The last thing that I would share is this. I think a lot of people today agree that the death penalty is bad. And I think one reason why they agree with that is because of the margin of error. Some people will say that, you know what, if 1 out of every 100 person is innocent, then the death penalty should not happen. My question is, if people can agree with that, why can't that apply to prison and incarceration? If 1 out of every 100 person is wrongfully convicted, why is that not enough for you to be against the entire prison system? That is my question to anybody who is struggling with the idea of abolition and getting rid of our entire justice system.
Yeah.
And a minimum, it's important for you to understand that the death penalty is irreversible. Right? When you take someone's life and you find out years later or a month later that person was actually innocent, you can't go back and reverse that.
Too late.
So to my brother who I love dearly, Brother Keith Lamar, who sits on death row in Ohio, I advocate for his freedom, wrongfully convicted. Tony Apovinich, who I don't know, but I know some of the freedom fighters that are involved in his cause, who was released because of DNA, exonerated because of DNA, yet rearrested 3 years later because they say the structural error in how the DNA was brought to him means that they had to overturn that and put him back in prison on death row.
Wow.
Which is insane to me.
Yeah.
We don't need another Marcellus, right? Who professed his innocence all the way until he was killed in Missouri.
Right.
The gentleman Robinson, who's in Texas, who's autistic and convicted for shaken baby syndrome, which we know there's huge error with that science, right? Huge error with the shaken baby syndrome science. This man is living with autism and on death row. So I think that we really need to understand that how important it is to abolish death row.
Yeah.
Because brothers like Keith Lamar have book clubs from death row. He's the first person in the world to have a live album from death row, a spoken word, a jazz album called Freedom First. Those of you who haven't heard it, I encourage you to look up Justice for Keith Lamar, look up his studio album, and see what he's doing with young kids here in New York City in his book club from death row.
And Imani, the only thing I'll add to that is life sentences are the death penalty too.
Yes, death by incarceration.
Death by incarceration.
We got to disrupt and dismantle the carceral system in its entirety.
Right. Man, this could have been 2 hours.
Yeah.
Could have been 3. Bruce, I just want to thank you. I know how busy of a man you are. You came here off the strength of a brief interaction that we had at the training in July. And to me, that speaks volume to me of who you are and how you are committed to just, meeting with, young Black folks doing this work, how much the work means to you. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come here and for sharing your story. And I know that your story is going to continue to change lives and change people. So thank you.
Oceans of gratitude for having me, man. And it means everything to share this space with you, brothers, man, as well as, to speak to our people.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you deeply.
For sure.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, we've come to the end of another episode of the Brothers-in-Law podcast. Please stay tuned. We have many more episodes to come. Take care, y'all. We out.